She arrived at his door soaking wet and lost. The rancher said dry off and stay as long as forever. She arrived at his door soaking wet and lost. The rancher said dry off and stay as long as forever. The thunder cracked so loud it sounded like the sky was splitting clean in half. Nora Calloway's truck sat buried hood deep in a ditch off Highway 9, steam rising from the engine like a ghost leaving a body. The rain came down in sheets so thick she could barely see her own hands. She had been driving for 11 hours. She had $43 in her wallet, no signal on her phone, and one name on a piece of paper that had nearly dissolved in her soaked jacket pocket. She ran. There was no other word for it. Not walked, not hurried. Ran. Through the mud and the dark and the kind of cold that gets into your teeth and stays there. She had no idea where the road led. She had no idea who lived at the end of it. The gravel crunched under her boots in a way that sounded wrong in the dark, too loud, too close, like something about the world had shifted while she wasn't paying attention. The porch light was on. She stopped 20 feet from the front steps of a house that looked like it had been standing there since before she was born. Wide and low and wooden, with a wraparound porch and a tin roof that the rain hammered like it had a grudge. A barn sat dark and enormous off to the left. Fenced pasture stretched into the black on every side. This was not a neighborhood. This was not a street with neighbors who could hear you shout. This was land that swallowed sound. She knocked anyway. The door opened on the second knock, and the man standing in the frame was not what she expected. She had built some picture in her head during those desperate running minutes, some vague shape of a threat or a stranger. What she got instead was a man in his late 40s, broad through the shoulders, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, holding a coffee mug like she had simply interrupted his evening, and not arrived like a half-drowned emergency at his threshold. He looked at her, she looked at him. The rain drove sideways off the porch roof and hit her in the back like a reprimand. His name was Cal Briggs. She did not know that yet. She only knew that he stepped back, pulled the door open wider, and said 2 words, "Come in." She hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds where every warning she had ever been given about strangers and dark roads and isolated houses ran through her head like ticker tape. Then the lightning lit up the pasture behind her, and the thunder followed immediately, which meant the storm was directly overhead, and Nora Calloway walked through the door. The inside of the house was warm in a way that hit her like a wall. Wood fire burning in a stone fireplace across the room. Bookshelves on 2 walls, crammed and unorganized. A kitchen visible through an open doorway, light on, something still on the stove. It smelled like coffee and pine, and something faintly like hay, the honest smell of a working place. Cal set his mug on the side table and disappeared down a hallway without saying anything. He came back with a folded towel, a pair of wool socks, and a gray sweatshirt that had seen better decades. He set them on the arm of the chair nearest the fire. She was still standing by the door, dripping on his floor, not sure what the protocol was for this situation because there was no protocol. There was no guide for this. Her truck was in a ditch. Her phone was dead. Her plan, which had never been a particularly solid plan to begin with, was in pieces somewhere back on Highway 9. "Dry off," he said. "Stay as long as you need." She opened her mouth to explain, to give the whole story. The reason she was on that road, the reason she had that address on a piece of paper in her pocket, the reason she had been driving since before dawn with nowhere to actually go. He picked up his coffee mug, walked to the armchair on the other side of the fireplace, and sat down. He opened a book. He did not look at her like she owed him an explanation. He did not look at her like she was trouble he had let inside. He looked at his book. Nora Calloway stood there for a moment longer. Then she picked up the towel. She had left everything she owned in the world in 3 bags in the back of that truck. 1 duffel with clothes, 1 cardboard box with the few things she had not been able to leave behind when she walked out of the apartment, and 1 smaller bag with the things that mattered most. She had been on the road since 4 in the morning, running from a life that had stopped fitting the way a coat stops fitting when you've lost too much weight. It just hangs wrong. Everything about it hangs wrong. She changed into the sweatshirt in the small bathroom off the hallway, the one with the cracked tile and the bar of plain soap, and a mirror that had a crack running top to bottom that she chose not to read anything into. She wrung her hair out over the sink. She pulled on the wool socks. She looked at herself and did not recognize the person looking back, which was both terrifying and in some way she could not yet name, a relief. When she came back to the living room, Cal was still reading. A second mug of coffee sat on the small table beside her chair. She sat down. She wrapped her hands around the mug. The fire popped and shifted, and outside the storm threw itself against the windows like it was personally offended by everything dry and warm in the world. She had been 27 years old that morning when she left. She felt about 104 now. She felt also in the same breath like something had cracked open in her chest that had been sealed shut for a long time. She did not say any of that. She drank the coffee. The clock on the mantel read 11:42. Cal turned a page. The rain came down and down and down. The truck was worse than she thought. Cal walked out with her the next morning through the mud and the after-rain gray light, hands in his jacket pockets, and the two of them stood at the edge of the highway looking down into the ditch together. The front axle was bent. The engine had taken water through the air intake. The front bumper had kissed a boulder hard enough to leave a permanent impression. Nora stood there with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. Cal crouched down and looked underneath. "Not driving out," he said. She already knew that. She knew it the way you know something in your gut before your head catches up. The truck had been her mother's. It was 12 years old and held together in 3 places by a combination of good luck and mechanical stubbornness, and the luck had run out on Highway 9 at approximately 9:47 the previous evening. Cal stood up, brushed the mud off his knee. "I can get Art Calloway to come look at it, best mechanic in the county. He's honest." Nora looked at him. "No relation," she said. He almost smiled, just about. She had nowhere to be, which was the problem, and also in the strange way that problems sometimes double as solutions. Not entirely the problem. She had been driving toward a name on a piece of paper. A cousin she had never met, a woman named Donna who had responded to one desperate message with a single line that said, "There is room here if you need it." That message had been sent 3 weeks ago. Donna lived in a town called Harlow, which was still 40 miles west. 40 miles she could not cover with a truck that was currently being embraced by a ditch. She could call Donna. The signal had come back that morning, thin and unreliable, but enough. She walked a little way up the road to where it was strongest and made the call. Donna answered on the first ring. Nora told her what happened. Donna said a word Nora's grandmother would have fainted hearing. Then Donna said, "I'll come get you. Give me 2 hours." Nora said the address out loud, then looked over her shoulder at the house, at the barn, at the man now walking back toward the fence line with 2 buckets like the crisis in the ditch, was a thing he had already filed and moved past. She stood there holding the phone after the call ended, looking at the land. It was different in daylight. The dark had swallowed everything the night before and handed it back this morning transformed. The pasture was enormous, running green and muddy all the way to a tree line half a mile off. Horses moved in the near field, 3 of them, calm and enormous in the morning wet. The barn was old but solid. The house sat square and unhurried in its clearing like it had made its peace with every storm that had ever tried it. She had not asked Cal Briggs anything about himself. She had sat across from him by that fire for 2 hours last night, and they had not really spoken. He had refilled her coffee once, without asking, and she had said thank you, and he had nodded, and that had been the whole of it. She had fallen asleep in the chair sometime after midnight and woken at 6 to a quilt over her lap that had not been there when she closed her eyes. She walked back to the porch. He was already coming out of the barn. "My cousin is coming," she said. "She will be here in 2 hours." He nodded. "Come eat something," he said. It was not phrased as a question. It was not bossy either, not in the way that bristles. It was the way you say something when you mean it simply and without anything underneath it. She followed him inside. The kitchen table had 2 chairs, and one of them had a stack of papers on it, and he moved those without comment, and they sat down, and he put eggs and toast in front of her and refilled both their coffees, and that was breakfast. She ate because she was hungry. She was very hungry. She had not eaten since a gas station sandwich somewhere around hour 8 the day before, which was both the saddest and most efficient meal she had consumed in recent memory. While she ate, she looked around the kitchen. The walls had 1 calendar and 1 framed photograph. The photograph was of an older woman standing in front of a garden bed with her hands on her hips, laughing at whoever was taking the picture. The calendar had notes written in some days in a handwriting that was careful and a little cramped: ranch work, vet visits, supply runs. He lived here alone. She did not know how she knew that for certain, but she knew it the way you know a quiet room has been quiet for a long time and not just this morning. She finished the eggs. "Thank you," she said. He looked up from his own plate. "What brings you out this way?" he said. Not a push, not an interrogation, just the question you ask someone when the storm is over and the morning has come in and there is nowhere particular to be for 2 hours. Nora Calloway set her fork down, and she told him, not all of it. Not the worst parts, not yet, but the outline, the apartment in Denver that had stopped being a home about 8 months before she left it. The job that had ended, and the relationship that had ended, and the bank account that had narrowed to something that made her breathe too shallow every time she checked it. The cousin she had found threw a letter in her mother's things, the name Donna Calloway written in her mother's handwriting on an envelope she had never seen before. A letter she had apparently written and never sent to a woman who was apparently family, which meant Nora was. Apparently not as alone in the world, as she had spent the last 14 months believing. Cal listened. He did not nod in that performed way where someone is waiting for you to finish. He listened the way people listen when they actually want to know. When she was done, the coffee was cold and the 2 hours had somehow become one. He said, "Donna Calloway is a good woman. Harlow is a small town. It will either drive you crazy or it will feel right. Depends entirely on what kind of person you are." She looked at him. "What kind of person does it take?" she said. He considered that for a moment the way he seemed to consider most things without rushing it. "The kind that doesn't mind quiet," he said. "The kind that can work. The kind that has a little patience for starting over." She turned her coffee mug around in her hands. "I am exactly that tired," she said. "The kind of tired that wants quiet." He looked at her for a moment, not long, not searching, just clear. "Then Harlow might suit you," he said. Outside, gravel crunched. Donna Calloway's blue pickup pulled into the drive. And Nora looked out the window at the woman getting out of the truck. A woman with her mother's exact chin and her own restless hands. And something in her chest did the cracking thing again. Harder this time, like the second knock on the door after the first one actually works. She stood up. "Thank you," she said to Cal, "for last night." He started clearing the plates. "Doors always open," he said, and he meant it exactly as plainly as he said it. She walked out to meet Donna. She did not know, not then, that she would be back. 2 weeks into Harlow, and Nora understood what Cal had meant. The quiet was a different kind of quiet than she had expected. It was not the quiet of emptiness. It was the quiet of a place that had already decided what it was and did not feel the need to explain itself to you. Donna's house sat on 3 acres at the edge of town. Small and neat, with a kitchen garden in the back that Donna ran like a minor military operation. Donna herself was 52 and built like someone who had been doing hard work since before Nora was born, which was accurate. She had a laugh that arrived without warning and filled a room the way thunder fills a valley, sudden and complete. Nora slept in the back bedroom. She took a job at the feed store on Main Street, which was exactly as unglamorous as it sounds, and also, she discovered, relentlessly useful. You learned the rhythms of the whole county from behind that counter. Who was expanding their herd? Who had a bad season? Who needed what and when, and whether they could afford it? She called her mother twice a week, calls that had become the most reliable part of her new routine. Her mother's voice coming through the phone from Phoenix with all the warmth of someone who had been waiting for their daughter to land somewhere solid. She did not think often about the drive that had brought her here. The ditch, the rain, the porch light. And then Cal Briggs came into the feed store. It was a Tuesday. She was breaking down a pallet in the back room when she heard the bell over the door and came out wiping her hands on her jeans, and there, he was at the counter, reading the small print on a bag of mineral supplement with the focused squint of a man who had been reading small print on feed bags for 20 years and still didn't entirely trust what they were putting in there. He looked up. "Nora Calloway," he said, not surprised in the performing way, just like a fact he was confirming. "Mr. Briggs," she said. "Cal," he said. She went around the counter. She found what he needed. They talked for maybe 6 minutes about the mineral content difference between 2 brands, which was a conversation so specific and practical that she caught herself 3 sentences in thinking, "This is a real conversation. This is what it sounds like when 2 people are just actually talking." He paid. He picked up his bags. At the door he stopped. "Dinner Friday," he said. "Donna too, if she wants. I make a decent pot of chili." It was the same quality of invitation as the eggs had been, plain with nothing extra loaded onto it. She said yes before she had decided to. The Friday dinner at Cal's ranch became a thing that happened. Not every week at first, then most weeks, then something that had its own permanent spot in the rhythm of her new life the way the feed store shifts did, the way the twice-weekly calls to her mother did. Donna came the first 3 times and then started declining with a grin that said she saw something Nora was not quite ready to name yet. What Nora knew was this. The house felt different every time she came back to it, not because Cal changed it. He did not move furniture or repaint walls or any of that. It felt different because she was different, slightly, each time, and the house was steady enough to show her the difference. The bookshelves she had barely seen the night she arrived now felt like a whole other conversation waiting to happen. The fireplace, the cracked bathroom mirror, the calendar with the careful handwriting. She was learning the language of a place, and it was learning her back. They talked over those Friday dinners the way people talk when they have stopped performing conversation and are just in it. He told her about the ranch, how he had inherited it from his uncle at 33 and spent the first 3 years convinced he had no business trying to run it, and the next 15 years figuring out that he did. She told him about Denver in the slow, piece-by-piece way she had not told anyone, not fully, Donna included. One evening in November, the first cold snap of the season, she told him about the worst of it. The relationship that had ended not cleanly, but badly. Not with a door slamming, but with a long, slow erosion that had taken more out of her than she had understood while it was happening. The kind of thing that leaves you walking through your own life, feeling like a stranger in it. Cal sat across the table with his coffee, and he did not fill the silence with reassurances or platitudes or the well-meaning rush of someone trying to fix a thing that cannot be fixed by talking about it. He said, "Takes a long time to find your own floor again after that." She looked at him. "How long?" she said. He turned his mug on the table. "However long it takes," he said. "And you'll know when you're standing on it because everything will stop feeling like it's moving under your feet." She thought about that the whole drive home. She thought about it the next morning. She thought about it standing at the feed store counter watching the county come and go with its needs and its news. And she thought, "My feet feel steady today," and was not sure if she was imagining it. December arrived the way December does in that part of the country, without any of the politeness of autumn lingering. The cold came hard, and the days shortened down to something almost provisional, just enough light to do what needed doing, and then dark. Nora had been in Harlow for 4 months. Her bank account had grown from catastrophic to merely thin. She knew the names of most of the people who came into the feed store. She knew which roads flooded and which ones stayed passable in ice. She knew the best table at the one diner on Main Street and that the coffee there was unreliable but the pie was not. She knew Cal's horses by name. That was a specific kind of knowing, she had decided. You do not learn the names of someone's animals unless you have been paying attention. There were 3 of them. Barley, who was the oldest and the most opinionated, a bay mare who had very clear feelings about being saddled before she was ready and communicated these feelings without ambiguity. Pepper, who was young and easily excited about almost everything including wind. And then there was Cash, a big dark quarter horse who was Cal's, clearly in the way a horse and a person match when they have been together long enough. She had started riding again. It had been years. Her grandmother had kept horses when Nora was a girl, and she had learned then, the kind of learning that lives in your body and does not leave even when you stop using it. Cal had noticed her watching Barley one Friday evening and said simply, "You can ride her. She's good on the trail." The trail ran along the creek that cut through the back of the property and then climbed a low ridge through pine and bare oak. The first time she took it alone, on a cold Saturday morning in early December with her breath coming in clouds, she got to the top of the ridge and stopped because the view from there, the valley laid out below her in its winter colors, the gray and brown and the thin, cold blue of the sky, was the kind of view that requires you to stop. She sat there on Barley for a long time. She was not thinking about Denver. That was the thing she noticed. She was not thinking about the apartment or the man or the bank account or the 14 months of barely keeping it together. She was just on the ridge, and it was cold, and Barley stood solid beneath her and breathed out great warm clouds of air, and that was the whole of the world for a few minutes. Cal was at the barn when she came back. "Good ride," he said, not a question. She smiled, and it arrived on her face without being organized first, which was how she knew it was real. Yeah, she said. They put barley away together, and she stayed and helped him with the evening feeding. And then they went inside, and she cooked this time because she had told him 2 weeks before that the chili was excellent, but he should let her make enchiladas, and he had said fair enough. She stood in his kitchen making enchiladas while he sat at the table, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with hardship or before or starting over. They talked about a book she had pulled off his shelf 3 weeks back and worked through. They argued cheerfully about whether the author had earned the ending. Cal had opinions, which she had discovered ran deep and specific in all directions, literature included. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the first real snow of the season was thinking about starting. After dinner, she washed up. He dried. The radio was on low in the other room, something quiet and instrumental, and outside the snow had decided to go ahead and begin. She thought about Donna's grin. She looked at Cal, and he was already looking at her, not with calculation, not with anything that wanted something from her. The way you look at a person when you have gotten used to them being in the room with you and are just quietly glad they are. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She drove home through the snow, slow and careful on the white road, and thought about the word home and how long it had been since that word had fit anything. It was fitting something now. The new year came quietly to Harlow. No fireworks, or if there were fireworks, they were small and personal and swallowed up by the wide, cold dark before they reached the edge of town. Donna made tamales and invited half the street, and Nora stood in a warm kitchen, surrounded by people who now knew her name and felt, for the first time in as long as she could trace, that she was inside something rather than outside looking at it. She had a conversation with her mother that night, standing on Donna's porch in her coat, the sky clear and cold and dusted with more stars than she had ever seen from Denver. Her mother asked if she was happy. Nora looked at the stars. "I think I'm getting there," she said. And then, because her mother deserved the full truth, yes, I think yes, she did not tell her mother about Cal. Not because she was hiding something, but because what she had with Cal was not yet a thing with a name, and she was not ready to hand it a name before it was ready to carry one. What she knew was that she drove out to the ranch most weeks, sometimes twice. What she knew was that Barley was her horse in some unspoken way, that both she and Cal had acknowledged without ever saying it out loud. What she knew was that on the days when the weight of starting over came back, which it still did, which she had stopped expecting it wouldn't, she knew where she wanted to be. In February, Cal's truck broke down on the highway. It was almost exactly the same stretch of road where she had buried her own truck 4 months earlier. She did not say that out loud when he called her. She just drove out with jumper cables and her coat and her boots, and they got it started in the gray afternoon cold, and she followed him back to the ranch to make sure it held. He stood by her car window after. "Full circle," she said. He tilted his head in that way that meant he was going to say something and taking his time with it. "Nora," he said. That was all. And in the way she had learned to read the particular economy of him, the way each word carried what other people spent 20 on, she understood that he was saying something that had been waiting a long time to be said. She got out of the car. The cold was immediate and real around both of them. "You said that first night," she said. "Dry off and stay as long as you need." "Yeah," he said. She looked at the house. The porch light on in the gray afternoon, the barn solid and enormous to the left. The pasture running to the tree line. "I think I need forever," she said. And it arrived in the air between them, and it stayed there, and neither of them moved to qualify it or walk it back or soften it into something smaller. It was what it was. It was exactly what it was. He reached out and took her hand. They stood there in the cold in front of the house that had been standing since before either of them, and the wind moved through the pasture grass, and the horses moved in the near field, calm and enormous, and Nora Calloway, who had arrived at this door soaking wet and lost and running, stood on ground that did not move under her feet. She was standing on her floor, she knew, because everything had stopped moving. She held his hand and the light was on, and behind them the door was already open.